Let's look at different operating systems for desktop computers. So, GUIs, or graphical user interfaces as we know them nowadays, are based on the Xerox Star machines from 1981, as we've seen, that were developed by the company Xerox in California. This is actually the first GUI, graphical user interface, and if you look here on the slide, you can actually see that the elements that we see here are basically what we're using still nowadays. So, elements of a GUI are common and independent of a system. And this is because all the graphical user interfaces are actually using the same kind of abstractions and metaphors to display elements. So for example, we see here on the slide icons to represent folders and files that are stored in them. Here we see this, for example. This is an abstraction, an abstract representation of the components of a file system. We see that we have windows. Windows are an abstraction and used as a container for a program that is executing. And within this window we can have a set of common elements that is independent of the platform. So here we see, for example, a window that is executing a presentation program. So if we look in the window, we see that there are, for example, menu bars. Here we see a menu. And from this menu we can select some things we want to do. So we can create here, for example, a new slide, we can skip a slide, we can hide a slide. So these are actions that we can execute through this menu that belongs to this presentation program. Here we see another menu, which is a so-called contextual menu, because it appears if we click, for example, a secondary button of the mouse. And the content depends on what we have clicked upon. So here we have clicked, for example, on some element in our slides, and the menu pops up to give us the possibility to do various things with this item. Bring it to front, align it, cut it, copy it, paste it, etc. So buttons we have buttons in the toolbar. Here on top we see some, and these are actually a set of tools that we can use when we're editing this document. So for example, we see here we can make charts, we can add text, we can do some shapes, we can include some media. So here is all kinds of buttons in the toolbar. So usually a window here has a set of common elements, like for example it has a title bar. Here we see the title bar with the name of the document that we are editing, and we have some buttons here for minimizing, maximizing or closing the application. So other common elements that are abstractions are scroll bars. Scroll bars can be used to scroll contents of a window because, for example, the contents that we want to show is in a document is bigger than the size of the window, so we can scroll and see also the other parts that we didn't see. Other abstractions and metaphors is that, for example, if we click on a title bar here and we would hold the button and drag it, we could be able to move a window, and clicking in a corner would allow us to, for example, resize a window. So these are all elements of a graphical user interface that are abstractions and are basically the same within all user interfaces. So, as we have seen before, there's basically three main operating systems for desktop computers, and the first one is Microsoft Windows family. And Windows is basically the most common used operating system on desktop PCs, and it's estimated that roughly 80% of the PCs that exist use the Windows operating system. So Windows has several versions. We can see that here on the slide. Windows XP is probably the oldest Windows operating system that you can still encounter installed on some PCs. And we have then Windows Vista, Windows 7, Windows 8 and Windows 10 that has just been released. So another possibility is the Mac OS operating system that is being developed by Apple. This also has many versions, as we can see here. We have 5, 6, 7 to 10. They are called Leopard, Snow Leopard, Lion, Mountain Lion, Mavericks, and the latest one is called Yosemite. Then the third main operating system family is the Linux family. And this family is different from the other two because Windows and macOS are being developed by companies that distribute their operating system with a copyright license, but Linux is an open source project. So anybody can create a Linux distribution, and this is called actually a distro. And since anybody can do this and anybody can use the open source code, there's many variants of the Linux operating systems by different companies. Here we see a couple on the slide, but there's many more. So Debian, Ubuntu and Red Hat are probably the ones that are mostly known, but you can see on this slide there's many, many more. Here, to give another small example of how complex the ecosystem of the Linux operating system is, we see a tree of Linux distributions over the last years. And we see there is a lot of different operating systems, and there's a lot of different branches of operating systems. So the ecosystem is quite complex. But independent of the myriad of versions of operating systems and different vendors of it, it's not difficult to change using one operating system and then the other. Because as we've seen before, the abstractions in the graphical user interfaces are common for different operating systems, and the user gets accustomed to them, so it's easy to use them. So for example, like we've seen before, there's a concept that we know as windows that we can move around, menus, buttons, scroll bars, icons, and all these things are the same abstraction used in all the GUIs of most of the operating systems. So changing operating system, you can get familiar with that maybe in a couple of days. And the main difference can be, for example, in programs. Some programs might not be compatible between operating systems. Most well-known programs are, but more sophisticated or specialist programs might only be available on a specific operating systems. And that might be the only problem that you might have changing from one to the other. So, to sum up again, we have seen the three most important operating systems, Windows and Mac, that come with a copyright license, and GNU Linux, which is open source. And these are the most common for desktop PCs. They are all based on the same abstractions and metaphors for graphical user interface, and actually these GUIs, these graphical user interface, and the abstractions that they implement are actually all predecessed by the Xerox Star that comes from 1981.